Hey, it's me, your boy Blue Getsuga, and today I'll be doing a Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier analysis on magical muskets as well as weather painters. Both decks came out in the same set, and both decks are column based with their own twists. First, I'll be going over magical muskets. Magical muskets, they're a light fiend archetype, and they their gimmick is they're allowed to activate spells and traps from their hand as long as you control at least a face-up magical musket monster. Magical musketeer monster. And because of that, also, not, also, each of the magical musketeers have effects whenever cards are activated in their columns. Except for Zachiel. Zachiel's the only one. Zachiel and I guess Max are the only ones who don't have that gimmick in them. Anyways, for the pros, this deck is consistent. This deck is pretty versatile given the wide range of magical musket cards you have and their various effects. Every every magical musket spell slash trap can be a hand trap as long as you control a magical musketeer. Meaning a single magical musketeer on the field can essentially be a threat to your opponent because all you had to do was just interrupt them with as many magical musket spells and traps. This deck has great spells and traps. They have effect negation, they have spot removal, they also have graveyard removal, and they also have stat manipulation. Oh yeah, and they also have a counter trap that can negate spells and traps. So that's also pretty damn good. This deck can also snowball advantage with especially when you have cards like Musketeer Max, Casper, and Doctor that allow you to essentially replenish your magical musket spells and traps. Also, Magical Musketeer Max is a pretty damn good is a pretty damn good card. Especially going second, it could essentially, if you resolve it, win you a game. And for the cons, you can despite being consistent, you can potentially brick since I know that sounds really weird. But anyways, you can potentially brick since you can open up with too many magical musketeers or too many magical musket cards. And sometimes you could just not open up with magical musket cards. But anyways, you can open up with too many of one. A good hand is usually a mixture of both, or a way for you to actually get multiple magical musketeers with at least two magical musket spells and traps in your hand. And that also brings up another problem. If you run out of magical musket spells and traps, and your opponent is actually able to pop off, you most likely will lose. Solemn cards hurt since Solemn Strike, if your magical musket monster gets Solemn Strike, there's not really much you can do about it unless you have the counter trap in hand. And even then, yeah, it's not very likely. Plus, your opponent will likely strike you before you even get a chance to search that card. Also, this deck struggles against untargetable monsters. They're not as prevalent as they used to be, but that is something I learned when I faced a magical musket player in rated with Hazy Flames. Why I was in rated with Hazy Flames, I have no idea. I guess you can say that I'm a masochist. And last issue, which I was alluding to earlier, they need at least one they need at least one magical musketeer monster on the field in order to function, and in order to use their spells and traps, which is pretty hard to do since you want to have a lot of spells and traps, and opening up with just magical musketeers is pretty bad because if your opponent manages to play through your interruptions and destroy your magical musketeer monster, you're not only going to have to hopefully get another magical musketeer monster on the board, but you also have to hopefully replenish on your magical musket spells and traps. So you can actually fight back, which is actually hard to do if your opponent actually breaks through your essentially breaks through your interruptions. And due to how fast Yugioh is, same problem with Ghost Trick. I mean, not as bad, but you know what I mean. Same problem with Ghost Trick. If your opponent actually breaks through your setup, it's kind of over and you lose, which is one of the reasons why Magical Musketeer Max is a thing. And because of that, I would say that this deck is a tier 3 deck. A lot of the decks that are tier 2 and above are actually capable of giving Magical Muskets a run for their money, which is why I would argue that this deck is a tier 3 deck rather than a tier 2.5 or a tier 2 deck. And next we have Weather Painters. Weather Painters are a link archetype that revolve around having your canvas cards, your canvas spells and traps. And how canvas spells and traps work is monsters that are in the same column or diagonally adjacent to their spells and traps actually grant your main deck Weather Painter monsters with special effects. And to activate them, you usually have to banish your weathering monster. So your opponent can't. Yeah. Also, another fun interaction. Cards like Skill Drain don't really stop them, since banishing is cost. Anyways, for the pros, they have non-target removal in the form of their trap card. Their good trap card. Which is pretty easy and consistent for you to actually get into. This deck has decent spells and traps. All of their spells and traps are pretty good except for the Sunny Canvas and I think Aurora Canvas. That one kind of sucks. I mean, it can be useful in some situations, but in most situations it isn't. This deck has decent monsters, the best monsters being Snow, Thunder, and Cloud. Like Thunder can actually help you get it can help you sift through your deck to get to your canvases, and if you already have something like Cloud out on the field, you can use Cloud to fetch up to 2 of your canvases from the graveyard, which is pretty cool. And Snowy just allows you to place any canvas from your deck upon summon. Upon normal summon, I mean. This deck can snowball advantage fairly easily. This deck is very consistent, and it is versatile. And this deck can swarm fairly easily. Also, this deck feels bad going second because your opponent can easily just negate whatever you throw at them. And this deck can't play through too many negates, which is pretty obvious. And because of that, I would say that this deck is a tier 3 deck. It's pretty it's a pretty good deck, and when it first came out, it was pretty powerful since there weren't that many decks that can keep up with it. But now that the game is a lot faster, since the start of Master Rule 4, this deck isn't really as great as it used to be. And because of that, it can't keep up with the meta decks, pretty much the same issue that it has with Magical Musketeers. And I would actually go as far as to say, in my opinion, that this deck is actually better and more fun than Magical Musketeers. Anyways, tell me what you think about these two decks, and it's me, your boy, and it's been me, your boy Blue Getsuga, and I'm out.